everyone, and welcome to Module 9. Last week we talked about food distribution and food miles, and this week we're going to talk about food loss and waste. Now, food loss and waste happens all along the food chain, but it's particularly pertinent in the United States at the retail and consumer level, which is why we're kind of considering it at this point in the course. Now, this is an area where I think there's little debate, and it's really an area where people of very different perspectives can come together. It's also an area where there's a lot of hope because there's a lot of practical suggestions of actions that we can take to improve our situation when it comes to food loss and waste. And nutrition professionals especially can have a really big role in improving our food loss and waste situation. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward in this talk. So let's just first frame the problem of food loss and waste. Now, in the United States, the generally accepted percentage of food that is wasted or lost is 40%. So 40% of the food that we produce in this country is lost or wasted. And we'll talk about what the difference between those terms are. So that equates to about 20 pounds of edible food that is wasted per person per month, and equates to $165 billion of edible food that is lost each year in the United States, and 141 trillion calories that is lost each year in the United States. So when we talk about all of these subjects that we've talked about along the food production chain, no matter how we produce the food, it really goes to no good if it's not eaten. So here's a graphic over here taken from the National Resources Defense Council. And again, I think this is pretty consistent figure that I've seen, which is that in the U.S., if we reduced our food waste by about 15%, that could feed 25 million people each year. So in the United States right now, it's estimated that there's about 48 million Americans that are food insecure. So another way that I've seen this figure expressed is that if we reduced our food waste by 30%, that would equate to being able to feed 50 million extra people, or really all the food insecure people in the United States. So I think one thing that you'll see when you look at other parts of the lectures from other speakers today is that really, especially in the United States, our issue is not that we don't produce enough food, it's that it's not distributed and a lot of it is wasted. And another thing I think that we should think about is really the efficiency of our food supply. So we've talked a lot about how we have this drive to make our food supply more efficient, and we have these goals for being able to feed 9 billion people by the year 2050. So, I mean, when I think about this topic, it's kind of interesting, not that addressing food waste could address the entire problem necessarily, but I think it's interesting that we put so many resources into these high technology interventions when really just decreasing our food waste, which is so much more simple and we can do on an individual level. There's really not that much it's not that there's not much research into it. A lot of people are focusing on food waste for research, but comparatively, when we think about the money that's put into research for these technological solutions, it really doesn't compare, because really those that are focusing on food loss and waste are such a smaller minority, and it's more of a public health type of action than a business action or an economic decision. So this is here we have the definition of food loss and food waste from the Food and Agricultural Organization. So you can read this here, but food loss is defined as a decrease in the quantity of or quality of food in the production process, basically, whereas food waste is the term that we use when we when food is when edible food is lost at either the retail or consumer level. So that's really the kind of difference between those two terminologies. Most people just kind of use the umbrella term, excuse me, of food waste. So you may see it like that. Okay, and then briefly I want to look at food loss by area in the world. So this is from the Food and Agriculture Organization. That's mixed up. But anyway, you can see, and it's by whether the loss is at the production or retailing level. So this is a slightly different definition, or at the consumer level. And you can see that worldwide we have about a third of our food is lost or wasted. So we're higher in the United States. Not really a surprise at 40%. But in lower income countries, the loss is mostly during the early and middle stages of the food chain, at post-harvest and at processing, often due to lack of technologies to preserve foods or deter pests, etc. Whereas in higher income countries, such as North America, we see here a much larger proportion of our loss is at the consumer level. And of course, this is a little depressing, but it's also really hopeful because we do have the infrastructure in place to be wasting a little bit less at this production level, and we can focus on an individual level on these consumer behaviors. Now, food waste can have a lot of impacts that we may not necessarily think about. So the first is food security. And it's kind of, well, first I want to back up a little bit. A lot of information in this PowerPoint is from the National Resources Defense Council. Here's especially one document that I used quite a bit, and it's called Wasted, Food Loss in America, or something to that effect. And they are coming out with a new version or an updated version of that this summer if you're interested. And also, I do want to have a little bit of a disclaimer that this is an advocacy organization. However, actually, I'm record these a couple weeks ahead of when you watch them. But just yesterday, I actually watched a webinar from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics about food waste. So this is a very relevant topic in our area right now, and one of the main speakers was from the National Resources Defense Council, and it's because they are doing a lot of the research that is available. They're doing it on this topic, so just to be aware of that. But of course, food waste is addressed by many, many, many other public health organizations as well, and we'll talk more about that. So the first impact of food waste that is easy to understand is food security. So if we have 40% of food that's going uneaten in the United States, that's food that's not available for people who are food insecure. So this can impact hunger, poverty, nutrition, and food availability when all of this food is wasted. The next area is economic development. So if we think about 40% of our food being wasted, obviously there are many costs to producing that food, and especially if we get it all the way to the retail and consumer level, so many inputs have been put into that really go to waste, and that's a huge loss in money to both the producer and the consumer. And the global losses of food waste are estimated at $1 trillion. And then also, because we are putting all of these inputs into producing this food that's never eaten, that's really water, fresh water, cropland, fossil fuels, fertilizers, pesticides, all of these that are put into food that actually no one consumes. So we can talk all day about whether one food production method is better than another, but really when it comes down to it, if we're putting, or if I guess we could argue about or discuss if putting these inputs in, such as fertilizers or pesticides or something, if it truly is beneficial. There's a lot of debate about that, and I think that's a really fair debate. However, I don't think anyone would say that we should use these inputs unnecessarily. And when we use them to produce food that no one consumes, then they are used unnecessarily. And this is just a little graphic here I wanted to use to demonstrate this food security. So this is Zero Hunger Challenge from the United Nations. And you'll notice that in their goals, one of the really most important parts that they identify is zero loss or waste of food. Okay, so this is a graphic that is really nice, that's taken from the Food and Agriculture Organization as well. So here we see that there's food wastage along the food chain, and we are going to food supply chain, and we are going to talk about where the wastage occurs in each of those areas. However, here we see what the results are. So when we waste food, there's reduced food availability, leading to food security concerns. We have increased pressure on land for production because we are using so much land, more land than we would need if we consumed most of the food we produced. And of course, this leads to environmental concerns. And then when we throw 40% of our food away, one of the biggest problems is that 95% of it ends up in a landfill. And so this leads to very big volume concerns for landfills, which of course we don't have unlimited places to put trash in landfills. And then it shows how this also impacts the loss of productivity. So first we have these direct impacts from when we're using so many more of these chemicals and fertilizers. It's easy to understand that there's an impact on air pollution. We talked about we need to use a lot more land, leads to more land occupation, more water usage, biodiversity loss, and deforestation because we need to find this more, to make more cropland to produce our foods. And then, of course, this can lead to socioeconomic impacts to the public, increased need for labor. Think about how much more labor you need to produce 40% more food than you would necessarily need. And then increased food prices, increased pesticide and nitrate exposure, increased safety and displacement risks. Again, think of, just for an example, increased exposure to these harmful inputs that we may use in production, and reduced access to ecosystem services. And so here we can see that just the simple act of wasting food can really impact all of these pillars of sustainable livelihoods, including income, food security, health and well-being, vulnerability, and sustainability. So it's really interesting. It seems like such a simple, small thing, and you can see because of the magnitude, it really does have some huge ramifications. Okay, and this is a graphic taken from the USDA. And I think this is just such a relevant time to talk about it because we also have in our own country the USDA focusing on food loss. So here they're saying that about 90 billion pounds of edible food is wasted in the United States each year, which equates to 130 times the volume of the Empire State Building. And I think what's really interesting here, and one aspect that we can really use personally and in our practices, especially to motivate ourselves and clients, is that this equates to $370 per person each year. So I have a household of 4 people, so that's almost $1,500 of just wasted income that's going when we throw out food. And you can see also what's really nice here is it shows where the money loss is coming from. So this doesn't necessarily equate to the volume of food wasted. Usually most of the food waste is with fruits and vegetables, but really the money associated with the food loss. And this is a really interesting graphic that kind of puts in perspective the environmental impact of food loss and waste. So here we have the top 10 global greenhouse gas emitting countries. So these are the levels of greenhouse gases that are emitting. No surprise, China's number 1, United States of America is number 2. But they also put in the greenhouse gases that are wasted or lost that are consumed due to food wastage that would not otherwise have to be produced. the greenhouse gases that are produced due to food wastage that wouldn't necessarily have to be produced. And you can see that that falls in number 3 for in the top 10 list of greenhouse gas emitting levels. So that's kind of an interesting way to think about it as well, what a huge impact wasting food has. Okay, and here's another nice graphic from this document from the Food and Agriculture Organization. So here we have wastage along the food supply chain. So wastage can even be pre-harvest. So think about if pests get into the crop, or bad weather, or something like that. So these are foods that are wasted pre-harvest. So that's kind of a small part of it, and we'll talk about that too. But then also we have food loss along all these other stages. And the result is that there's less available food for consumption. So because we are eating a smaller percentage of what's produced, then farmers have to produce more. And this leads to more pollution and more inputs needed. And here's kind of a comprehensive list of the areas of environmental impact. And again, I think one theme throughout this class is that environmental impact and health impact are not separate things. They're highly interrelated. So when we have water pollution, for instance, or air pollution, these have health effects, including public health expenditures, subsidies, which are needed for producing these large amounts of food so that we can waste 40% of it. We also have individual health, livelihoods. Think about the economic impact of that. So these are the direct costs to society, and then these are the natural resource scarcities. So we have land scarcity, water scarcity, phosphorus scarcity, which we've talked about in oil scarcity. So all of these things we've talked about in this class. So of course, if we're unnecessarily using these resources, it's going to lead to additional cost to society. Our food prices may increase, and as would the cost of the inputs. Okay, so it was really good timing that I got to watch this webinar yesterday, Food Waste in America, What Every RD Should Know. So this is just a little bit of a, if you're interested in this topic, the Academy does have a DPG of hunger and environmental nutrition. So it really deals with environmental nutrition and also food security quite a bit, because as you can tell from this talk, these are highly related. But so that was, it was, so if you are part of that, you have access to that webinar from yesterday. Or you may be able to just pay a small fee if you're an Academy member to see it too. But anyway, that's just if you're interested. However, don't worry, I'm bringing the highlights to you. So we did talk about the wasted resources that go into producing wasted food, basically. And in the talk yesterday, they gave some specific percentages. So this is included, so the resources used to produce food that would be wasted includes, and this is in the U.S., 25% of our fresh water, 21% of our landfill content, so 21% of our landfills are filled with wasted food, 31% of our cropland, and 30% of our fertilizers. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, if we were able to eliminate these unnecessary inputs, it would be the equivalent of removing 33 million cars from the road. So again, it seems so small when you waste food, but it really can add up. So now I want to go through the stages of the food chain and briefly talk about where food is wasted. And I'm going to focus mostly on number 4 and 5, the retail and consumer. But first, let's talk about the harvesting, processing, and distribution stages of the food chain and how food is lost. Sorry, it would be food loss at those stages, and how food is lost during those periods. Okay, so sorry, this slide probably should have been above the other one, but there is differences in types of food that is wasted as well. So we can see, I don't think it is a big surprise that most of the food that is lost is fruits and vegetables. If I think about at my home, that makes sense that it's more fruits and vegetables that are lost because they're so perishable. However, we also have a big loss of seafood, and this is a lot at the the reason this is so high, you wouldn't think it would be so high, but the reason that it is because when fish are harvested, there's just a whole lot of dead or dying fish that aren't wanted for that specific harvest, so they're kind of thrown back into the ocean or water, and so all of that is wasted. So that's why that figure is so high too. Okay, so let's go through the different stages. Okay, so first let's talk about production losses. So first we have in harvest, food could be lost due to weather issues that harm crops, due to marketing conditions. So I think they talk about in at least one of the other viewings I had for you today that, for instance, a farmer could have a whole field of a crop and then the price would drop and it really wouldn't be worth the money of harvesting and transporting it for what they would get to it. So that leads to loss too. Buyer quality standards. A buyer may want a food to be of a very specific aesthetic standard, and therefore the food producer may not even harvest it if it wouldn't meet that standard. Labor shortages lead to an ability to harvest all food. And then food safety scares. So think about when we have a food safety scare for something like spinach. Well, it's a long time before the public really trusts that that food is safe again, and therefore, the market in the meantime goes down and this food could be wasted. So on this right side, the NRDC gives some ways to address these issues, which is really nice. So for instance, we could revise, and I won't go through all of these for all of the stages, but I do want to just walk through a few of them. So the first is revision of quality standards. So maybe, like, the idea is that societally we could be more inclusive of, for instance, produce that doesn't look a very specific way and have a very specific color, and that would lead us to eat more of the food that's produced. I want to talk about any more of these. Oh, and regulatory measures that could incentivize a complete harvest. So a lot of these, some of these are really at the policy level that they're suggesting changes. And then regional food networks leading to less transport and less culling for short-lived and damaged products. So for instance, if a farmer did think that they wouldn't be able to harvest a field of crops, then they could maybe call in volunteers or people from a food bank or something to harvest it and get it out of there, and so that it can be used. And then again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but that article gives some really nice real-world examples of how producers have been innovative and creative in order to address some of these problems. So for instance, a farmer who saw that 70% of his carrots were going to waste because they were irregularly shaped created this market for baby carrots where he could cut them down to a uniform size and sell them for even more money. So that's a way to decrease waste and make more money in the first place. We have farmers markets in which oftentimes consumers are less particular about that their produce look a specific way. And then in California, they recently passed a bill allowing growers to receive a tax credit for donations of excess food to organizations that serve people who are food insecure. So again, these are all really nice opportunities to address multiple needs at one time. And I'll let you read this on your own, but here are some more examples of how some innovative strategies to address food waste. And then we have the processing and packaging stage where we do, there's a lot of loss due to trimming. So for instance, taking off certain parts of the food, both edible, which we would consider the real food loss, and inedible portions. So for instance, this processing and packaging, so this could be if an animal is condemned at a slaughterhouse and can't be used, or trimmings in a slaughterhouse, fish losses during spillage and degradation when they're being packaged and stored and transported. We could be spilling milk at this point, and processing efficiencies. So I think recently we have technologies such that we don't have that many losses in food due to processing efficiency, and that really as we've talked about in this class, actually, we almost have the other side of the spectrum where really we are trying to use every single byproduct in every single food. So we have decreased our food loss in that place, but there obviously is still situations where there is not processing efficiency. And so one of the methods we could use to address this food loss, for example, is secondary uses for trimmings and peels if they're not already being employed. Okay, and then here's, for instance, again, these are some really non-conventional solutions that we might think of. So, for instance, Heinz redesigned their sauce packets to process, to directly fill the machines instead of using the linings of the bags. And again, you wouldn't think of just that little bit of ketchup that's lost in the bags every time really adds up because of this like residual sauce that's in the bag. And really making that one change amounted in 40 metric tons of combined sauce and plastic waste annually. So these are just really innovative changes that companies can make. And then we have the distribution. So I talked about that a little bit in the processing and packaging, but a lot of this could be due to, for fruits and vegetables, it could be due to perishability of the foods if they aren't if they have inconsistent refrigeration. So if a truck wasn't working properly, a refrigerated truck, or in lower income countries, just maybe the lack of access to refrigeration, or it could be animals that have died along the way, for instance, or rejected shipments. When food gets to its destination, if the organization didn't think it was quality enough, they might reject it. So to address this, we can emphasize proper training and handling so we lose less food during this stage, and then really trying to network more in order to utilize this food that may have been rejected from a sale. If it's still safe, then we can still use it for other purposes. So, for instance, again, we could emphasize proper employee training for handling and storing foods. Now let's move to the retail losses. And really when we get to retail and consumer, this is the biggest stages of loss for those of us in the United States. So here, let's go through a couple of the reasons. So in the store, part of the reason could be the food displays, that these grocery stores want to make things look really, really full for marketing purposes, and then it can lead to, you know, having too much food available that then goes to waste. Ready-made food increases perishability for fruits and vegetables, for instance. So if I cut up a pineapple and put it in a container, that would be maybe more perishable compared to a pineapple that was whole. But I think there's a couple ways to look at that, because then it also may make it so that it does get in quicker. So two ways to look at that. But anyway, a big part is the label dates. So I think you'll hear about in some of the other talks, there's a lot of confusion about label dates. So they, for instance, a lot of products have a sell-by date for like peak freshness. They want it to be sold by that, but it's not really a food safety date. It can still be eaten after that time, but you know, maybe wouldn't be the ideal thing for the retailer to sell. However, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and many people might think there was a food safety issue, so they would get, or at the retailer level too, that they would get rid of it after the sell-by date and it would go to waste, even though it was perfectly safe. Package sizes that are too large, which is an interesting thing. I think that's addressed in the readings. You think, wait, that's more environmentally friendly when it can be produced in bulk, but then it might lead to more food waste. And I think in one of the articles, she actually talks about that we really need to talk more about, yes, there's more package waste when you have smaller containers, but it could also lead to less food waste, so we need to weigh the pros and cons of that. Discarded products, think of a holiday product, a Christmas product. After Christmas, nobody wants to buy it. It goes to waste. And then tight staffing, again, that we talked about. So really the lack of staffing to appropriately address trying to move these foods through before they go to waste. And then we have some solutions here. Discounts for out-of-date promotional items or slightly damaged goods. I love seeing those in the grocery store because they're cheaper and they're perfectly fine. So that's really an opportunity. Increased donations, which We do have protection for business in the United States. We have protection for businesses who donate food against liability for being sued if the food did cause sickness in the end. And then repurposing of foods as much as possible. So if we did have that pineapple that was about to go bad, maybe then we could cut it up and give it to consumers, and that it wouldn't completely have to go to waste. Okay, and here's some more kind of beyond the store. The cosmetic standards we've talked about, we kind of have this idea in the US that we want everything to be standard, and increased flexibility would really allow us to waste less food due to this cosmetic concern. Rejected shipments, contract terms that cause growers to overplant to make sure contracts are fulfilled. So that's a really interesting one, that in the US we really end up overproducing food because the companies contract with growers and they say we have to have this certain amount, so you better overplant in case there's, for instance, a natural disaster or weather concerns or whatever. And what ends up is that we have these overproduction of food and a lot of it goes to waste. And then downstream impulse bulk promotions. So, you know, buy one get one free, for instance. Oh, I can't resist that deal. I'll buy one and get one free, but then maybe one would go to waste. So there's ideas about how to address these. So, for instance, consumer education, that just because it says sell by doesn't mean you can't buy it. Just because it has a blemish doesn't mean it's not usable. And then, for instance, for this bulk promotion issue, some solutions that have been proposed would be buy one, get one later. So the consumer could say, yeah, I'm going to buy this because of this deal, but can I come back later? And so I don't end up wasting the food. And really, it could benefit the retailer too, because just like a gift card, the consumer may never come back for it, and then they just get that that cost back. Okay, and here are some practical examples of increasing efficiencies in the retailer. So let's just pick a couple. A popular grocery store estimates it sells $1,500 per day in produce off its bargain shelf, which offers bags of damaged or nearly expired produce for 99 cents. Now, I don't know about you guys, maybe that wouldn't float your boat, but I know for many college kids, and even for me too, and even for people who aren't as financially strapped as I know I have been, and I'm sure many students are, this is a really nice solution. I'm so happy to always see like cheaper produce. So that's a nice solution. And then we have food service, which if any of you have worked in your internship or in your profession, it can get really overwhelming to see the food waste in food service. I know when I worked in the schools for my internship, it was so sad to see it, like trays that were doled out. They were all ready for kids to pick them up, and then at the end there'd be like 50 trays left over that weren't picked up, so they'd all just go into the trash. So let's just touch on a couple of these, but please read through these more carefully if you're interested. But for instance, some of these issues you wouldn't think were connected, but expansive menu options. So think about in a hospital, we want to have lots and lots of options for people to increase customer satisfaction, but when we have so many options, it leads to more waste. So if I have 10 dishes, I'm less likely to use all of those leftovers or all of what I've made compared to if I just had 2 dishes. Fast food time limits. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of these. So think about in McDonald's or something like that, fries need to be served within 7 minutes of being finished, or they get tossed. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And then school lunches, we'll talk more about this moving forward. But for instance, kids will be at school lunch, they really want to get out to recess, so they eat super fast, and then they just waste a lot of their food. And then we have some solutions here. Limited menu choices, use of specials for flush inventory, waste audits to understand patterns of excess, encouragement for diners to take home leftovers in low impact containers. So again, that's another thing in the food service. If you think about restaurants and these huge portion sizes, a lot of it often ends up getting wasted. And some practical suggestions. Offer smaller portions. That's a great overlap for nutrition and this kind of environmental issue of food. It's not even an environmental issue, I should say, for nutrition, and then the greater umbrella of environmental nutrition. Then, I mean, if for any of us who are part of food service organizations, you really have a huge opportunity to make an impact by just altering food service management so we can decrease waste and use more food up that you already bought. So it's definitely an economically viable goal for businesses as well. And then we move on to the consumer or household losses, and I think all of us really are probably familiar with this. I know I am. We really have the luxury, I should say, of having very low cost food in the United States, and one consequence of this is that food may not be as valued as it could be because we think, okay, well, it's not that expensive. I'm just gonna, maybe I just really don't want to eat those leftovers. And if it goes to waste, it goes to waste, whatever. And I mean, as you can imagine, in other places in the world and in other times, and in other households, depending on income, wasting food is a much kind of bigger issue. You don't want to waste any food because you can't afford to waste any money. Again, we have lack of awareness. Low prices discourage frugality, confusion over date labels that we just talked about, spoilage, so I might produce poor visibility in the fridge. I'm sure we've all found that Tupperware full of moldy food in the back of the fridge that goes to waste, or just those leftovers you don't really want to eat. Impulse and bulk purchases, buying more than you can use, poor planning leading to overbuying, and over preparation, eating more than you can eat. And again, that's not a problem at all if you can eat those leftovers, but if they go to waste, then that's an issue. And one of our discussion topics this week is about what kind of disparities do you see, or discrepancies do you see between some of the solutions we've seen in prior lectures and topics compared to here. So I'm thinking of this over preparation, and then I'm thinking of the other week when we talked about food processing, and we said, it might be a really good solution to make a lot of food at home so that you can kind of put them in this Tupperware containers and take them for your lunches, and it's all ready, and you don't have to rely on processed food as much. And here we're saying, well, maybe if you produce too much food, then it might be more likely to go to waste. So again, this continuing theme of this class, that there are no easy answers, and we really need to consider the individual person and situation when making recommendations. Some solutions, wiser shopping, and we're going to talk about tips for some of these solutions near the end of the lecture. Better use of freezing or preserving food before it spoils. So this is going to be gone in a couple days, and I don't think I can get through all of it. Pop it in the freezer, take it out when I can eat it right away. And so this is a nice graphic that shows where the food losses occur by the type of food at each step in the supply chain. So we can see in production, it's mostly fruits and vegetables. Actually, and then also at post-harvest, mostly fruits and vegetables. In processing, most of the loss goes to grain products. But you'll notice in both these step 2 and 3 phases, we really have very little waste, and we've talked about that's because increasing efficiency. However, then at retail, we have more loss, especially with fruits and vegetables. And then consumer losses are the highest. So this is in the United States. Sorry, it's the U.S., Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And our losses are by far the most at the consumer level. And then we have kind of the end of this, the issue for food waste. So when we waste food, especially when we waste food, but also when we lose food, it's got to go somewhere. So, in an ideal world, well, I shouldn't even say that. So let's start with the facts here. 95% of food waste ends up in landfills. So a small portion is composted. And I think composting is a really important solution for food waste because at least the nutrients from the wasted food are going back into the soil to create more food. But as you can see, it's an extremely minimal quantity of food that's actually being composted. And it's also important to remember that even when food is composted, you still wasted all of the inputs along the entire food chain in the production, retail, transport, all of that. That's all been wasted for food that wasn't consumed. So composting is a solution, but it's not the solution. Food is the single largest component of solid waste in the landfills. And so when we do compost food, at least we're able to, again, put the nutrients back in the soil, but composting requires oxygen, and when we put the food waste in a landfill, it really doesn't get this oxygen, and decomposition leads to methane, which is 25 times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So again, this is a really big environmental concern, just the disposal part of the food waste. So let's talk about solution. Now that I'm sure I have adequately depressed you, let's talk about solutions. So here's the food recovery hierarchy, and this is from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. So we have our most preferred methods of food recovery at the top. Source reduction. The best thing we can do is just reduce the amount of food we're wasting. And that's the most important step in addressing this issue. The second is feed hungry people. So foods that aren't going to be utilized, let's get them to people who can utilize them. So for instance, at the retail level, let's think about day-old bread or something like that. Instead of going into the trash, let's bring it so someone can cook with it and feed people who may be food insecure. The next most desirable action would be to feed animals with food that is wasted. Then we have industrial uses for byproducts and food scraps. We have composting way down here. So yes, it's a solution, but look, it's so far down in terms of desirable outcomes. And then last, we have our least preferred, which is to incinerate it or put it into the landfill. And the good news is that, excuse me, the good news is that this is an increasingly, this is a topic that is becoming of increased awareness in many of our big organizations. So for instance, the big health organizations. So for instance, the USDA and the EPA have collaborated in order to have this food waste challenge. And this is a very ambitious goal of cutting our food waste in the United States in half by 2030. So that's a really big goal, but it's interesting to see that this has become such a priority for these organizations. So let's go to this. So here's the release of it, just if you're interested in going and seeing more details. So this was just released in September of 2015 and talks about that the USDA and EPA are working, and these are the nation's first food waste reduction goals. So that's really pretty exciting. And the USDA is going to different levels of trying to increase awareness of food waste and also help people decrease their food waste. So, for instance, they have this Food Keeper app. If you're interested, and this Food Keeper app is really nice because for individuals, it so let me read a description here. You can find specific storage timelines for the refrigerator, freezer, and pantry, depending on the nature of the product. Get cooking tips for cooking methods, and note on your device's calendar when products were purchased, and receive notifications when they're nearing the end of their storage date. Submit questions to the USDA about food waste and safe food handling and storage. So anyway, this is just really cool tool that we can use in order to manage our own food waste. And here's a link here. I think this is the link to that. I just read. Let me just double check. It wasn't something additional. Okay, yeah. So if you go to this link, then it'll give you a whole explanation of the Food Keeper app. And then we also have a huge initiative between the United Nations and the Food and Agriculture Association, which is this Save Food Initiative, a global initiative for food loss and waste reduction. So again, we have these huge, powerful organizations that are really taking a priority to decrease food loss and waste. And then this is kind of a busy slide, I apologize, but it's got a lot of helpful tips. So let's go here first. So this is the EPA tips for reducing food waste at home. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'll try to find, I wonder what happened. I'll try to find the right link and post it on there before I post the slides for you. But anyway, I'll find the right link for that. And then this one is from, this list is from the National Resources Defense Council and gives a lot of tips. Shop wisely, buy fruit and vegetable and produce that might look a little off because otherwise it's going to get wasted. Learn when food is actually going bad. You know, pay attention to your fridge, use your freezer. All of these are really nice tips. And then just on that food waste webinar that I was on yesterday through the Academy, I have not read this book, but this was one that was highly recommended for as a handbook for reducing waste in your kitchen. Okay, and this is another graphic from the USDA that also gives tips for reducing food waste. Plan and save. Be food safe, check for quality, because as we're checking for quality and we're checking to make sure food is safe, then we're reducing the risk of wasting it. Be organized, repurpose, donate. So there's a lot of really nice tips here. And again, what's nice, we have this My Plate in the bottom here. What's really great is that the USDA is taking such an interest in this topic. And here we have a graphic from the USDA about decreasing food waste in schools. So again, it's like, sometimes it can be really frustrating. Again, when I was in my food rotation, I thought, oh, I'm so careful to not waste any food. And then I go here to the school and it's like, it makes my contribution seem so little because so much food is being wasted. And the USDA recognizes this problem too. So they talk about certain, or demonstrate certain suggestions to reduce waste in the schools. So one here, scheduling recess before lunch can reduce plate waste by as much as 30%, which is really interesting. So by saying, kids, you can go out and play first, then it makes it so that lunch is much less rushed after the fact, and kids will sit and are more able to sit because they've expended that energy and sit and eat their food. Extending lunch can also decrease food waste. So maybe kids just don't even have the time to consume all of the food that they want. So here's new strategies, smarter lunchroom strategies that I'll let you look at on your own. Okay, so let's look at a few examples of schools and hospitals. We talk about schools being a huge waster. Well, hospitals, maybe even more. We waste even more food in hospitals because we're so concerned about food safety. We're so concerned about patient and patient families and satisfaction of foods. And all of these are really important, but of course they have some unintended consequences. So let's go to this first one of examples of reducing food waste in schools. Maybe. Let's try something else. Oh, here we go.
When my customers have a claim, I want to help them get things back to normal as quickly as possible. There's no better claim service out there, and our Alpha to Go app is just one way we make it easy to get that service. Anytime, anywhere.
For the best agents in the business, call Alpha.
Okay, here we go.
During lunch, so much food leaves the cafeteria table and ends up in the trash as waste. But now Franklin Middle School in downtown Bakersfield joins about 24 other schools in the Central Valley taking bold steps to encourage recycling.
It feels good because you're helping the environment and you're like cleaning up the garbage so you can help the trees grow.
When we recycle, they sometimes can use that to make other things, and it's good for our environment.
Students seem to be getting the message. On the bins, they'll find a sign with labels letting them know exactly where the unwanted food goes.
We had a lot of food that was going to the landfill because kids don't always finish the food.
But now Solid Waste Director Kevin Barnes says the food waste helps local farmers in the area. once it's broken down into compost.
Organics means the food plus the paper wrappers and the dirty napkins, the paper cups with ice in them sometimes. We can compost all that and make soil amendment for the farms.
It cuts down on travel time and fuel, taking the trash 15 miles away to landfills. And it's saving space in those landfills.
Finally, the compost ends up saving the farmers water. The more compost they put in their fields, the less water they have to put, and the world needs to save water.
Okay, so that's kind of an innovative solution. Hold on. Let's go to these hospital ones.
Well, imagine being able to reduce the amount of food that you waste by 86% every week. That's exactly what the kitchen staff at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia has done. WHEG's Avajoy Burnett has an inside look at how the entire staff is pitching in to make their kitchen greener.
This kitchen staff of about 80 people has quite a few accolades under their belts. For the last 2 years, these workers in the Martinsburg Veterans Affairs Medical Center have voluntarily taken on more work on a daily basis, all in the name of going green.
The staff came up to me and they said, "Look at all this food we're throwing away." And they said, "Isn't there something better we can do with it?"
That's when the head of the kitchen, Barbara Hartman, and her team came up with a plan to cut back on the amount of waste coming out of their kitchen. They even got national attention with a sustainability award.
We are using an electronic waste tracking system. It's state-of-the-art. We're the first VA to use this system.
The staff named the program Waste Watchers, using a program from the EPA as a guide. And with a combined effort of every worker in the kitchen, the staff was able to cut back their waste by 80%, from more than 1,500 pounds per week to less than 300.
This is a Lean Path waste machine, and I'm basically taking the waste, it's turkey, mechanical soft turkey, and disposing of it via the Lean Path machine.
After the waste is weighed and categorized, it goes in a biodegradable bag like this one. Then it's stored in a freezer until a local farmer picks it up for composting. Composting accounts for about 54% of the waste, and another 250 pounds of food goes to a local nonprofit every week.
This is probably the highlight of our day in food service because it's very heartwarming to be handing this food off that once you go in the trash and now is going to feed people.
As for this extra time and effort workers have to put in,
it's well worth it.
No one seems to mind. In Martinsburg, West Virginia, Avajoy Burnett, WHAG News.
This is really inspirational. I think it's easy to think, what can we do at this food service level? But you can see there's many creative innovators that are addressing these issues in very practical ways. Let's look at one more example.
My name is Greg McLean. I'm the food service manager at University Hospital's Geauga Medical Center, and I oversee all the food production and the clinical nutrition program. When people come into our cafeteria, especially for the first time, I'm certain that they notice we don't have typical garbage cans. We have table tents on each one of our tables where our diners sit that direct them to place bottles into a recycling can and to place their trays into a cart with all items on it so that we are able to take it into the kitchen and then separate it out into what is recyclable, what is compostable, and what needs to be discarded. A common misconception with composting is that food is the only thing that's compostable. All napkins are compostable, all of the food items, all of the food waste that's left is compostable, and then any paper containers that aren't coated with wax are also compostable. Annually, we're able to compost 270 tons of waste. Other items that aren't compostable can be recyclable. We recycle cans, bottles, cardboard, paper, and newspapers. We're currently using melamine dishes that are reusable, that are made of recycled materials, and when they break or chip, they're compostable, which is a unique change on melamine from the past. On an annual basis, University Hospital serves about 3.8 million meals. As a method of reducing food waste, we use a software program called Food Management that helps us properly project the number of items that we should make each and every day. Whenever available, we use produce that has been grown within 100 miles of our hospital. The benefit to using locally grown produce is to reduce our carbon footprint from having bought produce from California or from Chile and having it shipped. It also helps the local economy as well. Every business should be concerned about sustainable practices, but hospitals like university hospitals use many items that can be recycled, can be composted, and it's very important that we do our part to reduce our carbon footprint.
Okay, so that one wasn't only about food waste, but also about other steps that can be taken. We're going to talk more about how nutrition professionals can address some of these larger areas in future lectures.